The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Payback for populists. Contrary to the dominant media narrative, populism is alive and well in both America and abroad. With Congress coming to the grim realization that one election does not a republic remake, and populist nation-first countries in Europe and the rest of the world finally pulling themselves out of the shell-shocked fatigue of the last year, we'll be examining why now, 2021, is Payback for Populists year. Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com, heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm Mark Angelides, and I'll be sitting in the host chair for Tim Donner this week. We've heard it all before. This movement, this moment in time will be a defining light in our quest for an equal equity society. Words that give believers in individual liberty some serious nightmares. But what if these epic moments and movements, so lauded by the press, are really little more than manufactured narratives designed to suppress another, more organic and more powerful movement? Well, that's what a lot of folks believe on the conservatarian right, and the evidence and recent polling backs them up. 2020 was a year of racial reckoning, according to the vaunted Fourth Estate, marked by police brutality, epitomized by the death of George Floyd. It seemed that the Black Lives Matter organization could do no wrong, except, of course, for the wrong they were in fact doing. Public support for the national, international cause peaked just after the tragic death of George Floyd, but it seems the riots, the lootings, the violence, and even the murders that surrounded this loose cabal of BLM and Antifa managed to accomplish two things. Number one, it exposed the media narrative for what it truly was. And number two, it sapped any goodwill that regular folks might have felt for such a cause. Here's the data. At the peak, support for BLM reached over 20% positive support nationally. This was an increase from 2019 of 5% positive support. That's quite the leap. However, perhaps due to all the violence surrounding the protests and the marches, that support again dropped to just 5% favorability recently. Jumping back a few years, we saw that this organization's rise to prominence in 2016, just prior to President Trump's landslide victory. And it seems that there was nothing Black Lives Matter couldn't achieve. It's almost as if it were a left-leaning militia that gets marched out when Republican candidates need to be derailed. If I may be speculative for just a moment, perhaps we'll see an uptick in BLM activities and support through the media of such activities just prior to the 2022 midterms, especially with more than 30 gubernatorial races taking place at the same time. The joy with which the media backs and, yes, supports BLM clearly has a direct impact on its approval ratings. Remember, this national organization, rather than the local chapters, was founded by self-proclaimed Marxists. They want to get rid of the nuclear family structure, and they make demands that the police be either defunded to the point of decrepitude or abolished entirely, when, of course, polls show that across the board, most people want more or the same level of police presence, and that's for the black community, that's over 80%. Yet just ask any regular folks on the street what they think Black Lives Matter is all about, and you'll likely hear the answer, they're about racial justice, or perhaps they're about protesting, or at least mostly peaceful protesting. But BLM is not the only sign of the left that has taken a public opinion beatdown of late. There's Dr. Anthony Fauci, America's doctor, or as Dr. Jill Biden herself likes to say, the man loved by every American. Well, perhaps not so much anymore. From the notorious Fauci flip-flops, the contradictory mandates, the derision of any who go against Fauci, the World Health Organization, and even the CDC, even when they contradict each other, the unwavering support had a little chance of lasting. A recent Trafalgar Group poll showed that 42% of respondents felt their confidence in Dr. Fauci had either decreased or decreased significantly. While the confidence drop was most prominent among Republicans, 66%, this was not a wholly partisan result. 20% of Democrats also felt their sympathies wane. Now, the Trafalgar Group, who ran that poll, has often been accused of being more right-leaning than other pollsters. However, a similar lack of faith in the good doctor was echoed in a YouGov and Yahoo poll that found only 46% of respondents thought that Fauci had helped with the coronavirus crisis. I wonder why. American populism, it's an ever-burning ember that just sometimes becomes a flame. It gets doused, it gets smothered, but it never goes away. Like the phoenix, it rises again out of the ashes. In fact, populism has been around for as long as the world has had governments. Yet it's always, or at least recently, seen as something dirty, something so beyond the pale. It makes you think, what precisely is a populist policy? Well, at its base level, it's one that's popular with the people. How did this become a dirty word? In the modern world, it's frowned upon and deemed dangerous in much the same way that socialism or communism used to be before their very recent resurgence. Perhaps, though, the reason that populism has never really gone away is that it's reactionary. It's a force that wells up in the people when the crushing tyranny of an overarching government becomes just a little too much to bear. It makes you wonder why there's a concerted effort between government and the media to finally try and extinguish it. We'll be back after these messages.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
It's a media onslaught. Every opportunity to smear conservatives, whether valid or not, is taken to belittle, berate, and ultimately silence conservative voices. I'm Mark Angelides, standing in for host Tim Donner on this Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American network. Now, this kind of attack is as old as politics itself, from the floor of the Roman Senate to the steps of Capitol Hill today. We see broad brushstrokes of infamy aimed at political opponents. Now, to help us lift the veil a little, we're joined by Liberty Nation socio-political correspondent and host of the Fresh Perspective podcast, Mr. Jeff Charles. Welcome, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It'll be fun.
Let's hope so. Now, Jeff, I get the political fundraising value in having your enemies cut off from the, let's call it the usual lines of communication, whether that's appearing on TV shows, using social media, things like this, even the town square, if you will. But why is the once vaunted, once respected Fourth Estate playing along with these particular machinations?
Yeah, so I mean, the media has always had issues with this, even from its inception. I mean, it's hard to remove bias completely. I mean, but you also had, back in the early 1900s with the war between William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer, all the way up until now. But the difference is that what we're seeing now over the past few years, the media has gone from being a journalistic outlet they've gone from that to being more like activists. People think that I'm being tongue in cheek when I call it the activist media, but most of the time I'm not. I mean, this is what we have here. We have activists masquerading as journalists, getting in front of cameras and promoting a specific agenda that is designed to empower a group of people, a political party or a political agenda. So that's why we're seeing more and more that they are going along with this tendency, because they're not here to inform us anymore. They're here to influence us.
Yeah, the great influences of the Fourth Estate. It does seem that these pundits and producers of the legacy media, they almost want to lampoon anybody who has a conservative opinion. We see it when almost any conservative says one thing that is out of line from the postage stamp consensus. I mean, is this to discourage folks from having these opinions or from being able to voice them? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think they are trying to use persuasion to get people to think in the way that they want, but they know that they can't persuade everybody. So the objective really is to cow people into not expressing these opinions, but also into ensuring that the ones who do are not taken seriously. It's the same tactic that the government has used in the past when they invented the term conspiracy theory, so that if somebody accuses the government of doing something wrong, or they accuse government officials of engaging in malfeasance, they can just say, oh, he's a conspiracy theorist. Now, I understand that. I mean, a lot of conspiracy theories aren't. I'm not a conspiracy theory guy, but still, the tactic is the same. So, I mean, you look at the recent developments with what has come to light about the coronavirus pandemic. And now people are more open to the idea that maybe it was developed in a lab, that it's possible. Before, they were mocking people for saying that. They were trying to make sure that these people were not taken seriously.
Specifically, President Donald Trump at the time, when he said, if he was asked if he'd seen any evidence that would suggest that it was more than likely a lab outbreak rather than something that naturally occurred, zootopic, I believe is the term, and he was roundly mocked for it, as you say, as a conspiracy theorist. And now watching CNN, which I do for your benefit, listeners, I hear that they're now trying to say, sure, but when Trump was doing it, he was basically just being a racist about it, as opposed to he was. So we don't know what the
spin mode.
Yeah, we don't know what the final result is on that yet, but it does seem to be now that people, let's call them those who are on the postage stamp consensus, are allowed to talk about it or are talking about it. It seems that everyone else can talk about it as well. So it's very much a gatekeeping role for many in the media, or so it seems. I mean, there's always been this low-level Cold War of ideas between the right and the left. But I don't see, and you write about this a lot, Jeff, I don't see much in the way of the political right putting up a solid fight against the left. Now, I want to talk about why that is. Are they perhaps channeling Michelle Obama and deciding that they'll go higher when the left goes low? Now, everything we know about politicians in general tells us that's probably not the case. So what is it, Jeff?
You know, I think it's a level of ineptitude, to be honest. I mean, I hate to put it that way, but I think that's what's going on. I mean, for the past few decades, for the longest time, the right has been more of a reactionary force. Now, this doesn't apply to everybody on the right. It doesn't apply to all right-wing historical figures. But in general, the way it goes is there's a problem that needs to be solved, that America is facing, or that Americans are facing. The Democrats come up with an idea to fix it. And this idea is usually involving more government involvement in our lives. And it's undesirable. It may do a level of good, but the harm outweighs the good. But then on the right, our contribution to the conversation is just saying the Democrats' idea is bad, it's horrible, and we shouldn't do it. But conservatives don't put forth an alternative idea to say, hey, this is a conservative solution to the problem that America is facing. So in the end, we either get more big government and the problem is still there, or we get nothing and the problem is still there. And conservatives aren't seeking solutions to these problems. It's not that we don't have the solutions, is that we are very poor at selling these solutions.
There's a well-known British author and conspiracy theorist, David Icke, who says that he says that he has a good idea of where society goes because what he calls problem reaction solutions. So there's an almost invented problem that provokes an expected reaction. Oh my goodness, this is so bad. Somebody's got to do something about it. And then, of course, all of a sudden, the political right or the political left, they turn up with the solution, which is what they wanted when they exacerbated the problem in the first place. Right. It goes everywhere, this conversation, Jeff. So, Jeff, let's broaden this topic even wider than it is right now. Now, political ideas, they don't have to be left or right, do they? I mean, surely what lawmakers of all stripes should be doing is trying to strengthen the Constitution and the founding documents in general of the Republic. But do the denizens of Capitol Hill believe that this is actually what they're doing, that they're strengthening the Constitution, albeit through their own veil of experience?
You know, that's a very good question. I mean, you brought up, the Roman Republic earlier. And back then, I mean, it's the same then as it is now. I mean, I think a lot of these people, probably even most of these people in Capitol Hill, are just there for clout. They're there for power. And then you also have people who are the true believers. And then you have the true believers who end up becoming the people who just want power and clout. So, I mean, as far as ideas go, there are ideas that are put forth more by the right, and then ideas that are put forth more by the left. But again, the in between is where we're supposed to be trying to solve these problems, and we're not. And we're supposed to be trying to strengthen the Constitution and make sure that the government is in its proper role as far as the Constitution goes. But I think for a lot of these people, they don't really care about that. And that's on the left and the right.
Yes, it does seem quite cyclical and getting nowhere.
As I say, there's nothing new under the sun.
As says the Rabbit Hole podcast, which everybody should listen to, the Rabbit Hole Politics and Prose, hosted by me, Mark Angelides. Now, last question, Jeff. What can John and Jill and Susie Q public do to avoid getting caught in the crossfire?
I would say to focus locally. We get so caught up in federal elections. I mean, we've got the most voter turnout when the presidency is on the line. And honestly, we are obsessed with the presidency far more than we should be. That role.
But by we, you mean the conservative movement in general, right?
I would say America in general. I mean, just in general, we are too obsessed with the presidency. I mean, that position was never meant to have that level of power. And yet we seem to think that everything revolves around it. I mean, that's not a king. It's somebody who's supposed to do a job. But your local politics affects your life far more than Joe Biden or Trump or anybody else could ever affect it. So I would say because I do believe that there are people on both the right and the left who want to actually deal with a lot of the problems that we face. But unfortunately, we focus on the wrong solution. So I think once we start focusing more on our communities and on our neighborhoods and on, yes, our mayors and our city council, then we can actually break free of a lot of this, I hate you because you're on the right. I hate you because you're on the left. You're a communist. You're a Nazi, blah, 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 blah.
And we can just hate our neighbors for who they are.
Yes, exactly. That's progress.
Jeff Charles, thank you ever so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll be right back after these messages.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio. I'm Mark Angelides. Now, with a fresh tilt on the Supreme Court, expectations have been high for conservatives that new blood would deliver. Guns and abortions are both on the docket this season, and to help us unravel, indeed cut through the Jordan knot that is jurisprudence in the United States, is host of the Uprising podcast and Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Mr. Scott D Cosenza, Esquire. Thanks for being here, Scott.
Hi, Mark. Thank you.
Now, Scott, for the last, I guess, 5 years, we've been hearing that Roe v. Wade is on the chopping block. Doubtless, this was used by both sides of the political divide to raise funds, to demonize their opponents, to drum up enthusiasm within their base, or indeed anger within their base. But there is a case heading to the Supreme Court right now that actually could have an impact, unlike all of the rhetoric of the last 4 or 5 years. Can you fill us in on the details of this, Scott, please?
Well, yeah, and what's happened in the past few years forms a basis for this, which is to say that there's been a concerted effort by all those forces you mentioned to advance restrictions on abortion for all the benefits that it confers, meaning from the genuine belief that, of course, for those on the pro-life side, that there is a life that's being extinguished. So for that benefit, all the way through to just the additional fundraising, direct mail campaigns that people who are in elected office that get to sort of lift themselves up on the pro-life platform can gain from that. But we've seen in Mississippi a restriction that's going to be before the Supreme Court in the fall, Mark, and it has the potential, like you say, unlike some of these other cases, this is real. This is about the Supreme Court taking the case to address a question that could result in the overruling of Roe v. Wade. And that's why. And the question is whether or not pre-viability restrictions on abortion are constitutional. Before this case is heard, the ruling has been that any restriction on abortion that significantly impacts it, that is pre-viability, which is to say before a fetus or baby or whatever can live outside the womb, that has been unconstitutional. We may see a new ruling now, and of course, the anti-abortion people are fingers crossed and praying that this will somehow, be an end to the significant rights guaranteed by Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, and some fundamental restriction on abortion that we haven't seen since 1973, basically. And of course, the other side is scared that might happen and are fighting against it. So what this decision, this Mississippi decision would mean is not that all of a sudden the process as it is now stops overnight, but rather that it creates a wedge effect. Well, we don't know, Mark. See, the thing is, once the Supreme Court gets to examining a sort of core question about it, what their result could be anything from 0 to 100. And what I mean by that is, and let me just, before I state my analysis of it, I don't think that we're likely to see the most radical of changes, because both on the left and the right, the court is generally a conservative body. And whether justices feel one way or another about a rule or law, they generally disfavor radical changes in the law. They favor much more glacial changes in the direction that they sort of prefer. So that said, the Supreme Court could declare that with new technology and understanding of human development, that fetuses are human beings and have a full suite of rights, just like a born person has, rather than the unborn, and that abortion is illegal at a certain point, maybe even only weeks or a month in. That's a possibility. I don't think that's likely, but it is a possibility, all the way through to a restatement of a Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey restriction, which is to say they could say any pre-viability restriction is unconstitutional. Now, the question then is, if they wanted to do that last part where they just said it's unconstitutional, why take the case? So that's why there's so much hope on the anti-abortion side, like you opened the segment with, talking about basically the conservative justice is going to pay off, right? The thinking is they only took this case for one reason. They want to make a ruling that's more restrictive on abortion. Otherwise, just let the precedent stand. Do we know? We know that it takes 4 justices to agree to hear a case, but we don't know exactly how many chose to hear the case. We just know that it's at least 4. That's right. That's exactly right. Okay, Scott, let's move on to the other of the big beast constitutional questions, the Second Amendment. Now, across the nation, we have seen laws, bills, initiative, measures. They're coming out at quite a pace. Some seeking to strengthen the right to keep and bear arms, others to weaken it for whatever reasons they see, whether it's a public safety, a greater good reason, whatever those reasons happen to be. But it is at SCOTUS where the decisions will ultimately be made.
and there's a gun case in the offing. Can you tell us a little about that, please?
Now, this is a case out of New York where the Supreme Court has said it will decide whether or not the decision to basically restrict the right to keep and bear arms from carrying is unconstitutional or not. The gun rights people, and I count myself among them, Mark, are hoping that the Supreme Court articulates a bright line standard that states have to recognize the right to carry a firearm included in the bundle of rights incorporated and included in the Second Amendment. That hasn't been decided yet. Right now, the position of the Supreme Court is that Americans have a fundamental right to keep and bear arms in the home, but they don't necessarily have a fundamental right to carry firearms if the state has certain regulations that frustrate that right. New York is perhaps one of the worst states to try to get a permit or a license to carry a gun. It's generally only given to politicians and those with political friends. And
Scott,
this case,
am I right in thinking that in New York they have a may issue rather than a will issue?
And shall is what you're thinking of rather than will. Right. Yes, that's exactly right. This is may issue versus shall issue, and that concerns the discretion that government agents have. Whether a may issue state is you go and you present your credentials. If they meet the requirement, they're required by law to give you the license or the permission slip. And in a may issue state, they can still say no if they don't like, for whatever reason, anything that you're doing.
So that would be, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I am not a lawyer. I'm certainly not a constitution lawyer. I'm not even an American. But would that be, for example, I
only count 2 of those against you, by the way. Okay, one is for you.
Not being a lawyer, of course. Would that be that a clerk in a county office, for example, or the head of that department,
it depends,
determining how the Constitution is applied?
It can be a clerk in a department. It's different in different states. This is a New York State case, but it will apply nationwide. I happen to know in New Jersey, for instance, it's chiefs of police and judges who are involved in that decision-making process. So the point is that it's somebody that you have to convince or gets to make a decision based on their own just seat-of-the-pants judgment, not applying an objective standard, which is how I think most Americans think that our rights,
well, I mean, if it's written in the Constitution, you would imagine that that's how it is. Now, just to come back to the broader question there. So this is about being able to carry a firearm rather than being able to own or possess.
This is about permission to carry a firearm outside the home. That's exactly right.
Now, I did used to be an English teacher. So perhaps I have an advantage on you over this, but not when it comes to the legal elements. But to bear arms, to bear usually means that
Mark,
you
let
have
me just
them
stop you
on
right
your
now.
person.
Let me just stop you right now and say that if you think that the plain language of a constitutional amendment is going to control how a justice rules on the constitutional amendment, I think you're already down the wrong path there.
Down the rabbit hole, which is a podcast you should listen to. All right, Scott. Now let's move on from that. You obviously, Scott Cosenza will be keeping everybody updated on the pages of libertynation.com on how these cases progress. But let's take a look at what else is on the SCOTUS docket. Now, you do keep a close eye on this. You have me on the phone, on our messaging every Monday morning saying this thing's coming out today, this thing's coming out
Well,
today.
When there's opinion release dates, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So what cases of interest are coming up for those people with a more conservative bent?
Yeah, I think I just want to focus right now on a case that I don't think that's going to come up, which is the Florida restriction on tech companies banning elected officials during their time in as they run.
This is just for those of you who may not have caught this yet. This is Ron DeSantis signing a law.
It's a law that produces fines for social media companies if they deplatform declared candidate for elective office. I think within 4 months or so. Anyway, there's a set term for which they can't do so.
So we're fairly sure that in the run-up to 2022 and 2024, Donald Trump will be applying to be the state head of dog catching. in Florida, and he will be on social media, or he will be collecting,
I believe it's that's kind of brilliant.
He'll be collecting $100,000 a day from the social media
that won't
companies,
happen.
Or he'll be dog catcher.
So the law author, I do like that kind of end run though for him, like just to try to run for some very low level office in order to secure his Twitter credentials back. But I'm confident.
For those of you who have been asleep for the last 5 years, Donald Trump is willing to troll the entire world. Yes,
I don't think that's going to happen, because I don't think that the law is going to pass constitutional muster. In fact, I want to check my watch to see if it's been declared unconstitutional just yet. It seems like a blatant trampling over the First Amendment and an attempt to single-handedly convert a social media company into a kind of public square or government body. Even the language in the law or discussing about it, Governor DeSantis declared that it was viewpoint-based discrimination, for instance, which is totally inappropriate and illegal for government bodies to do. But for everyone else, it's not. It's appropriate, and we do it all the time. You don't hang out with people who think that you should be killed for your your political beliefs. You viewpoint discriminate.
Not that I know of, Scott.
Against those people, exactly right. As do we all. So the idea, I find it troubling, the notion, without announcing up front, that we're looking to engage in a kind of sea change of how the law approaches a certain thing. And let's debate that. I find it off-putting. It's totally anti-freedom and anti-business in the sense that I think it's a real wedge issue between libertarians and conservatives. The idea that the governor and the government of Florida should tell any business how they should operate, who they should allow as customers, I think is anathema to freedom in the free market.
Scott D Cosenza, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Global populism on the rise. Joe Biden in the White House, an effective majority in both chambers of Congress for the Democrats. Brexit came and went and appears to have disappeared from the public discourse. Has the promise of the populist uprising, so all-encompassing in 2016-17, has it faded once more into the shadows? I'm Mark Angelides, sitting in for your regular host, Tim Donner, and you're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Has populism, arguably the only real contender against globalism, died the death that so many on the political left had wished for? Or is the resurgence on the horizon? It certainly seems that those who favor a global approach to domestic politics have the upper hand. Vice President Kamala Harris, rather than visiting the U.S. southern border to deal with her Biden-appointed task, has decided that the Northern Triangle is close enough for government work, as the saying goes. Here's how White House press chief Jen Psaki phrases it.
Is the vice president planning on going to the border? I know she's handling this. Why hasn't she been there? Is she planning in the future to go and see what's going on firsthand?
Well, the vice president is overseeing exactly the same portfolio that the president did when he was vice president, which is the Northern Triangle and engagement with countries in the region about how we can work together to reduce the rate of migration and work together to address corruption, address the root causes of why so many people are traveling to our border. I expect she will make a trip to the Northern Triangle at some point soon, so that would be where she would travel, given her purview.
Well, wait a moment. Setting aside, just for now, the cover your behind language of I expect, at some point, soon, and the overuse of the word would, the White House feels that the out-of-control border and immigration crisis is best solved by heading thousands of miles away from where the problem actually is. This is truly a marvel of globalist thinking. Not to be outdone, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, speaking alongside Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, announced that the U.S. taxpayer would be handing over an additional $75 million to Palestinians this year. Here's his motivation.
What reconstruction and relief need to do is not just answer the immediate needs, and those needs are significant and they're urgent, whether it's water, whether it's sanitation, whether it's electricity. But they need to offer a genuine prospect for opportunity, for progress, for material improvement in people's lives. And our goal is to give the Palestinian people, including those in Gaza, a renewed sense of confidence, of optimism, of real opportunity.
Uh-oh. Whenever the U.S. government, or any government for that matter, starts talking about rebuilding in someone else's country, things tend to go from bad to worse very, very quickly. However, is it all play on the globalist football field? Or is there a populist pushback at the end of this dark tunnel? Well, according to Mr. Brexit himself, Nigel Farage, who's presently on the America's Comeback Tour, the answer is yes. Listen to what he has to say.
And those patriotic people started voting for me in their millions. And now that Brexit's done, they're voting Conservative. They voted for Boris Johnson in their millions. And socialism in England is now unconscious, lying on the floor. We have defeated socialism in England. We will not see it again for a long time. So please don't be down.
And what of Europe? Recently, the conservative leaders of Hungary and Poland, Viktor Orban and Mateusz Morawiecki, joined Italy's Matteo Salvini to discuss, quote here, Atlanticism, freedom, family, Christianity, sovereignty, and opposing anti-Semitism, end quote. Orban stated that we want a European renaissance. He said, we reject the ridiculous geometry that the right only has extremes, while the left only has a center. This perhaps not so merry trio, they're leading a charge for what they call a campaign to unite sovereignists. And despite the naysayers, they seem to be doing just that. Viktor Orban is as popular as ever, and Salvini, although his party's polling has slumped this latest year, he still has more support than any other political group in the country. Along with Poland and partially other Visegrad nations, they're seeing the same European alliance forming within the European Union. As the leading players in their own countries, it seems they're likely going to succeed. So where does that leave a resurgent populism? Well, Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis seem to be the head of the American pushback on this. Nigel Farage, despite officially retiring from frontline politics, is still very much acting the role of international statesman. And in Europe, the power struggle continues. But it's certainly not a one-sided, uneven battle. I'll leave you with a short summation from opendemocracy.net and the author Angelos Chrysogelos, who sums up the situation quite neatly. Here's a quote. Populism has been the midwife of a new equilibrium, crushing the neoliberal parties of the center-right and the center-left as they were supplanted or conquered from the inside by a new unapologetic nationalism on the right and a liberal sovereigntism on the left. In the process, societal frustrations with globalization and a loss of sovereignty were harnessed to meet the needs of the state in a new competitive environment. End quote. In the long run, it's only governments that accede to the will of the people, the populist, if you will, that can stay and retain power. We'll see how this lot gets on. I'm Mark Angelides. Thanks for listening to Liberty Nation Radio on the Radio America Network.